Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is Genre Vision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And this week, we're going to emancipate ourselves fantabulously with Birds of Prey and the what is it? The Fantabulous Emancipation of one Harley Quinn?
I believe it's drinking encapsulated Fantas with Harley Quinn.
Oh, yeah, right.
Sorry. I couldn't even get it out. Okay. Hi, everybody.
Hey, so yes, we'll be doing Birds of Prey, which is all we'll be referring to it after this. But before we do that, just quick calls to action, and it's actually a big one. FinFlix Season 2 is underway, and actually, for our Patreon subscribers over at patreon.com/genrevision, you can listen to the very first episode of FinFlix Season 2, uncut, uncensored, right now. It's on Jaws 3 or Jaws 3D. And we actually did something a little special starting with this season of FinFlix. If you want to become a premium subscriber over at Patreon, it is just $5 a month to get you everything that's available over there. But if you would just like the bonus material for FinFlix, we've introduced a new $2 tier for FinFlix subscribers.
That's correct. So if you go to patreon.com/genrevision, now you can sign up for just a $2 a month fee to get all of the bonus content from FinFlix Seasons 1 and all the stuff that we're going to make for Season 2. For Season 1, we did uncut episodes and extended interviews. We don't have any interviews on the books for Season 2, at least not yet. But what we are doing, in addition to the uncut episodes, just like we did last season, is production diaries. We're actually going to write about how we make the show month to month, or perhaps even more often than that. So if you go to patreon.com/genrevision right now, that new $2 tier is available to you, all of the FinFlix goodies.
And we will be debuting the regular episode of FinFlix on, what's the debut date for that, Travis?
2/20/20.
2/20/20. All right. I think that's all we've got for calls to action this week. So let's... I can't remember what you said.
Let's encapsulate a Fanta with Harley Quinn.
Let's encapsulate some Fantas with Harley Quinn. Now, I guess this has to become a standard bit whenever we do a DC movie. I am outed as somebody who, if you draw the line in the sand between Marvel and DC, I take DC's side. I've spoken at length about how that's a very difficult thing to be in this day and age because of poor quality movies and even poor quality fan base. But I like seeing the DC movies succeed, and I think the Warner Brothers DC stuff is doing more things in an interesting manner as far as filmmaking and style and approach than what most of Marvel is doing. So with that said, if you want to say that I'm a DC shill or something and invalidates anything I say, okay, but I'm going to come right out and say it. I was anticipating Birds of Prey quite a lot. The marketing has been very strong. I think really sold the Harley Quinn personality of the whole thing. And based on the trailers and the marketing that we got, Birds of Prey is exactly the movie that they were selling us.
Right. Birds of Prey was taking some bold swings, I think, in the marketing by selling it as a movie with a really distinct and vibrant visual style, something that didn't take itself as seriously as the sort of operatic tableau painting stuff that we saw from, say, Zack Snyder, or even in the sort of vibrant rainbow colored tableaus that we got out of Aquaman. This was pretty apparent that we were going to get something different. It didn't have the sort of tatted up aesthetic that Suicide Squad did, although it certainly borrows a little bit of that in its overall construction. This is, for all intents and purposes, a sequel to Suicide Squad because it does acknowledge the events of Suicide Squad, and not in particularly big ways, and it does even feature a little bit of footage from Suicide Squad.
Any direct connections are passing enough that it's clear this was intended to act as a standalone vehicle for Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn. And I think that's good. DC committing to kind of self-contained franchises instead of feeling the need to hype people up over the interconnectivity of all of these movies. I think abandoning that, at least for the time being, is absolutely the right move. And Birds of Prey is a great step in that direction, because Birds of Prey is a movie that bursts with its own unique personality. And that personality very much is Harley Quinn's personality. I think I said to you that this feels like a movie Harley Quinn would make herself, and that's because the movie is pretty squarely in her headspace throughout. It doesn't mean that we're always seeing things directly from her perspective, but the style and the tone of the movie sticks with her, I would say, 80% of the time.
Yeah, this is going to be not the greatest comparison, because I don't think this is a especially great movie, but do you remember Chappie and how it was sort of the Zef movie, ZEF, the style that the Antwoord, sort of uses in their whole aesthetic? This has a similar sort of thing going on where they've defined very precisely like what the Harley Quinn look is, what is the art style that we're going to surround this character with, and what does it reflect about the character. This whole movie is rather exquisitely designed, I think, to be about her, and not just on a story level. It's about how she sees the world and how she experiences her life. I think where my first big compliment to the movie comes in that it's really a character first kind of movie. Like, the plot for the movie doesn't even kick in like a proper end of first act until like a half hour in.
It's interesting when you talk about the defining what the Harley Quinn style is. The term that came to my mind is cartoon punk. I think this has a very cartoony aesthetic, but it is R-rated, and monstrously so, I would say, maybe to the movie's detriment.
I don't know. It's not like it's especially profane. They're not saying fuck as much as The Irishman, you know what I mean?
There are a lot of fuck words in this movie.
I mean, there are fuck words aplenty, but again,
to the point where even somebody like me who doesn't normally pay attention to the level of swears in a movie was like, they say fuck a lot in this, and I think that was probably a directive. I'm not saying from Warner Brothers, but obviously from somebody, be it the director Kathy Ann or Margot Robbie, who's also a producer on this, that they wanted to say, we're gonna say fuck a lot, we're gonna be profane, and that's gonna set us apart, because while it's still profane, it's all in very, very good fun. I mean, I find it kind of refreshing that this is the DC movie that follows Todd Phillips' Joker. Not just, as a comment on that movie, but it's like, oh, see, this is also R-rated and violent and profane, but it is such an absolute blast of a time.
Yeah, I mean, this really isn't a comment about the movie, but more of a compliment to Warner Brothers, in that it is clear at this point, and hopefully this film is successful enough that they feel, confident in continuing. But it's clear at this point that they want to have a DC Comics film brand that is extraordinarily varied in its output. They're not going to try for a consistent sort of flavor throughout all their products. They're going to make sure that there is, aspects about each one of these that will stand out and separate itself from the pack. Is there even a post-credit scene at the end of this movie?
There's a bit of audio.
Okay. But it's not like they're putting it in as a trailer for the next movie and whatever this is,
No. So I agree. I think that commitment to variety is refreshing. But on its own, I think Birds of Prey, there's certainly influence, I think, either aware influence or non-aware influence of certain other properties like Deadpool or Guardians of the Galaxy. I mean, Christina Hodson was the writer on this, and that was very purposeful. I believe Kathy Ann, or it was either Kathy Ann or Margot Robbie, said like, I tracked her down, like I wanted her.
Well, I mean, Christina Hodson, if you all don't know, was the woman who wrote the Bumblebee movie, which, if you all haven't seen it, it's the best Transformers movie.
By leagues.
Yeah, I was going to say that sounds like not quite a huge compliment, but it's a really good movie.
Mm-hmm. And I think that establishment of personality is probably, it will be a dividing line, I think, for some people, but I think it's Birds of Prey's best asset is that it feels like a movie made by someone, like not a factory product.
Right. It doesn't sound like it was created by algorithm. Like it has a distinct voice in the writing.
Yes.
And it definitely has a distinct sort of perspective through direction and also through, artistic guidance, thanks to, people like Margot Robbie being, producer. Like she was credited as one of the PGA producers on the film, which means that she had significant role in actually getting the film made. So after the kind of clout that I think she got from her success as Harley Quinn in Suicide Squad, I'm really happy with the fact that they gave her the ability to define what she wanted the character to be and to have that movie get made and for us to see it in a format that feels unadulterated.
Agreed. So moving on to some others, because since this is a new release, we'll stay spoiler free for a while and we'll let you know when we get to spoilers. You mentioned the plot. There is a MacGuffin in this movie, and it's a diamond, but there's like bank information encoded inside of the diamond or something. And this MacGuffin is fine. It's like, I would say it's like the best MacGuffins in that it doesn't really matter, which is supposed to be kind of the definition of a MacGuffin. There is a version of the movie, I feel, that probably could have excised it completely and maybe made things even more character focused. But the story is that this diamond is the Bertinelli diamond, and we'll get to why that's important later.
Well, who are the Bertinellis, if people don't know? Because I didn't know going into the movie.
They're a mafia family that was, I don't know if this is spoiler, I think it's early enough in the movie, that they were gunned down in a power grab that eventually benefited the Sionis family. And the son of the Sionis family is Roman Sionis, a.k.a. Black Mask, and this is played by Ewan McGregor, and he's this club owner and big-time gangster who's trying to make kind of his name in Gotham. And he wants this diamond, and eventually, for reasons that I think we'll talk about maybe during the spoiler section, he employs Harley Quinn to get it, also at the same time putting a bounty on the person who has the diamond, Cassandra Cain, who's this, I don't know, she's a teenage kid or something.
Yeah, she's
like how old she is.
13, 14-year-old pickpocket, basically.
Yes. Along the way, there are the other Birds of Prey who kind of come into the mix, such as Dinah Lance, a.k.a. Black Canary, who's a singer at Black Mask's club, who eventually becomes his driver. There's the mysterious Huntress, which, again, we'll talk about more in spoilers. Renee Montoya, who's a detective on the GCPD, who is the only one really trying to crack the Roman Sionis case because he's so wealthy and powerful. He kind of gets a pass by the police department. And am I forgetting any of the other birds? I think that's everybody.
We've got Mary Elizabeth Winstead as Huntress. Mm-hmm. We've got Journey Smollett Bell as Black Canary. We've got Cassandra Cain, and then we've got Rosie Perez. So yeah, they're the Birds of Prey, and they do get title billing, but they definitely are accessory characters to Harley Quinn. It's not like the marketing campaign was trying to make it look like Harley Quinn was the lead, and then they pulled the bait and switch. No, Harley Quinn is the lead. Even when she's not on screen, like you said, it still feels like the movie is sort of infused with her perspective. The whole movie takes place in a cartoon almost.
Well, and that's reinforced by a lot of voiceover from Harley Quinn.
Right, which is really well-written voiceover, actually.
It is. I think there was another way to kind of shave some of that off. But I think the voiceover actually is important in the bigger picture, because like you said, it keeps us in Harley's headspace even when we're not spending time with her.
Right. It it's not like baldly written exposition. It really is, her voice and, the specific way that she phrases things and the information that she chooses to tell us. It's like, this is all very informative as to not only what's going on, but how she feels about it. The movie takes its first 15 minutes just to establish what has happened to Harley Quinn since Suicide Squad.
Yeah, I think we'll get into kind of the more plot specifics with spoilers. I did want to say, though, I think I mentioned Deadpool earlier, that there is a couple moments of fourth wall breaking from Harley Quinn, looking directly into the camera or finishing a line of voiceover on screen and looking at the camera. I was very glad that those moments were few and far between. I think that if that had pushed it too much, it might have felt a little over the top. And this is already a movie that knows it's over the top.
I read this in a review, and it said that Harley Quinn herself is this delicate balance of being really grating and pretty endearing. And there is this sense in the first half hour of the movie before the plot really kicks in that, yeah, Harley Quinn is a little quirky and a little intense for most people, even in Gotham City, which is a city of superheroes and supervillains. So they definitely make a point of her being a bit much, and the movie has to put that idea forward without distancing the audience at the same time. So there's a delicate balance. There's delicate balance in Margot Robbie's performance, in that she has to be that kind of really strong personality and be a little bit grating. Like all the other characters think she's an asshole. So that's got to come across.
And call her as such.
Yeah, they do in fact call her an asshole. But the same thing had to happen in the writing. Like they couldn't, one more line of VO directed, right at the camera could have upset the apple cart, I think.
It's like you said, I think the balance is met. When it started happening, I was like, okay, that was really well done. Don't push it. Because this is going to be a line you have to write. But you talk about performance. We can talk about that without being spoilery. Margot Robbie, there's a reason she's the thing they carried over from Suicide Squad. She gets Harley and the sort of modern takes on Harley perfectly. I think she will easily be the definitive version of the character for a certain generation. And I think she walks that line between really annoying and really funny and really awesome throughout the whole movie. And I gotta say, before we get into specifics with people, I think across the board, the cast knocks it out of the park.
Yeah, no question. Rosie Perez is pretty much doing what Rosie Perez does. So that's like always great.
To the point where it's like, somebody says, why does she speak like a cop in a bad 80s movie? So by acknowledging it actually allows her to kind of lean into that in a fun way, and in a couple moments subvert that trope. But she's got great little bits. She has a wonderful t-shirt in the movie.
Yeah, it was, it reminded me of her character from Pineapple Express a little bit.
Yeah,
sort of hard talking cop, but she was like, it was almost like she was wearing one of Seth Rogen's t-shirts.
Yes, which is very fun. Mary Elizabeth Winstead, I've seen reviews that say she's not in the movie enough. Well, Travis and I are big fans of Mary Elizabeth Winstead, and I'm sure a lot of other people are. So, of course, we would want her in the movie a lot. I think the movie utilizes her just right because she's the one super mysterious character.
Mm-hmm.
And once the movie commits to starting to reveal her, she's pretty much around until the end. And the revelations of this super mysterious assassin that's going around killing gangsters in Gotham, when the reveal happens, it's actually really funny. So, and when she finally gets to kind of cut loose and go berserk, it's great.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I like the most about her, even though she doesn't get a whole lot of screen time or development, is the fact that, like, not only does she have all of these issues from, what had happened to her in her childhood, but she socially awkward in a way that the other Birds of Prey aren't. And I like that, even by the end of the movie, they're still revealing sort of the extent of that. And I think Mary Elizabeth Winstead, given the few moments that she has to work with that stuff, like there's a moment in a Chinese restaurant with her that I think perfectly defines, how her character is trying to appear intimidating.
Mm-hmm. She's great. Journey Smollett-Bell, she kind of reveals herself, not in a mysterious way, but I think part of her performance is that she's holding a lot back and holding a lot inside. And if anybody knows who Black Canary is, you can kind of know where this is going. And it's certainly been in trailers and stuff, but I won't spoil it in case you don't know. But I love that she's extremely tough. I like that we were talking earlier, and you made a good point about how the action scenes have very different feels, and some of that has to do with reshoots. Some of the action was reshot by Chad Stahelski and his team, and you can definitely tell when they were in control. But there's an earlier fight scene with Dinah, and you said it's like, oh, this is straight up classic kind of 70s blaxploitation kicking and brawling action.
Yeah, it feels like you're watching Pam Grier. It's the same like high heels, tight pants, like kicks and stuff like that. And the choreography isn't lightning fast and super brutal. It's a little bit slower. It almost felt like it was on the verge of blaxploitation parody.
It doesn't, I don't think it features,
but I feel like it was clearly making homage to blaxploitation style action.
It doesn't do it in a pastiche way ever.
No, never. But it feels obvious to the point of like, oh, they were clearly trying to go for this.
But I think Journey is great in the role.
She kills it.
Yeah. A surprise for me.
She gets a lot of screen time. She gets the most perspective out of anyone else in the film. Agreed.
Ella J. Basco, she plays Cassandra Cain. She's a younger actress, so I want to cut her a little slack. I think she's the only weak link in the cast, but I don't think. I just said to you, it's not really a weak link. It's like least favorite, because there's some moments where she's really fun and vibing and sells the emotion of the movie, because I do think she's a big emotional core after a certain point in the movie.
Yeah, there's a scene between her and Harley Quinn in a grocery store that is one of my favorite scenes in the film.
Yes.
Because it really talks about, the two perspectives of these characters and where they come from. There's no plot development in this particular scene, really. It's just these characters explaining to one another how they operate and the differences between them, and, how one of them wants to be like the other one. And it's stuff like this that the movie does really, really well. In addition to, of course, it's action, but it's such a focus on character.
Yeah, it focuses in on the misconceptions they have about each other.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
That's a really cool way to play off character. But we got to talk about Ewan McGregor as Roman Sionis, a.k.a. Black Mask. This is one of my favorite comic book villains, maybe in all comic book cinema at this point. I mean, I'm not saying he's like a top 5 or anything, but Ewan is having the time of his life getting to play this is so interesting to me. I would say his attitude and demeanor wouldn't be out of place as a cameo 2-episode guest spot on the Batman 60s show, but he's playing an R-rated total psychopath.
Yeah, it definitely crosses over into camp, but it also never loses the fact that it's like genuinely menacing and gross. Like, this character really is a terrible asshole, definitely a misogynist, and just overall, like, generally a creep who, while he enjoys the fact that he can get people's faces cut off at any moment he wants to at the snap of his fingers, he's a germaphobe. So he doesn't like to see blood or snot or anything like that. He's a bit of a weirdo, in addition to just being evil, pretty much.
Well, I think that introductory scene, which again we won't exactly spoil, but is another moment of perfect balance work, where it is funny, it is incredibly darkly funny, but at the same time, it establishes that this character isn't a joke. He is a menace, and he is intimidating, even when he's being silly and admittedly foppish.
Right. It's, it lets us know that this is a character that Harley can't deal with by just bopping him on the head with a cartoon hammer. And the movie, this is going to sound silly, but the diegesis, the actual reality that the story takes place in, is a little tenuous because Harley's perspective is so cartoonish. The movie actually opens with an animated prologue that talks about Harley's childhood.
So perfect.
The fact that they managed to sort of pack as much information into this, and it's the most baldly expository stuff that the movie has, but the style is such a delight. It's like the perfect blend of like Chuck Jones style animation with like John Kricfalusi. It's cool shit, man.
Yeah, I agree. Some other things before we get to the spoiler wall. I do want to talk about score and soundtrack, because I can't remember what movie we did an episode on, but you talked about a movie where there aren't needle drops. The needle never leaves the record.
I think we were talking about the 50 Shades of Grey movies.
Yes. Birds of Prey is guilty of that. However, thankfully, the soundtrack is uniformly bumping.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't an album that I think I would listen to over and over and over again, but the attitude of the music really amplifies everything else that the movie is doing. It really adds to that sense of distinct perspective through use of new original tunes and then also sort of covers of classic songs. And, this really, I think, fun inclusion of Marilyn Monroe's, Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend, that in a scene between Harley and Roman Sionis is like really indicative of where the movie's headspace is at, because, this happens at a point where Harley wants to sort of disconnect from reality. And not only is that kind of fantasy musical stuff beautifully shot, but it lingers a little bit longer than I think people would normally be used to. This isn't my shelf pick, but it really does remind me so heavily of Scott Pilgrim versus the World, where the actual reality of that movie, it's thrown out almost immediately. What you expect to be realistic just isn't going to happen, so get used to it.
Yeah, I would say Birds of Prey does something similar to Scott Pilgrim in that it creates its own reality, but it's, as opposed to Scott Pilgrim, it still remains in enough of a grounded understanding that people can grasp onto. But those little breaks, like a lot of on-screen text and illustrations, like we said, moments of Harley breaking the fourth wall, the way the movie is told, it's a non-linear movie, but it's only non-linear because it's the way Harley is deciding to tell it.
Yes, and the first half hour or so, or maybe even more of the movie being non-linear, actually breaks the movie up into chunks that take place from specific perspectives. So it's not only telling us who the characters are to Harley, but it's actually letting us spend some time with individual characters without Harley's sort of influence. And so it actually develops characters into feeling like their own sort of autonomous beings so that they feel substantial. The one I think who really suffers the most from that is Huntress, just because what's going on with her is tied to the plot in a different way than the rest of them.
And because she's set up as the most mysterious, it means that the movie keeps her from a distance because Harley doesn't know who she is.
Yeah. There is a detective subplot that doesn't last very, very long, but Rosie Perez's character is the detective assigned to a crime scene where I think it's 3 or 4 guys that have been murdered in a restaurant. And the one in the middle, they're sitting in a booth, and the guy in the middle was killed with a crossbow bolt through the neck. And they do this really, really gorgeous switch between timelines where, they intercut the scene of these guys getting killed with the, cops investigating the crime scene. And of course, this has been done before, but the way it's executed here is, I think, in a couple moments, kind of breathtaking while also being really funny.
It's inspired.
Yeah.
But real quick, before we switch over to spoilers, I did want to talk about score because the score is done by Daniel Pemberton, who did the score for another superhero movie with a very distinct attitude and personality, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Because the soundtrack is so constant, I was really keeping my ear out for original score. I like the little bits that I heard. It's a lot of like female vocalizing.
Sure. I frankly had some difficulty telling where the source music ended and the score began, because it all creates this sort of, I don't know, one distinctive voice and vibe throughout the entirety of the film. Like it feels like Pemberton's music was there to match whatever attitude they had chosen through all the needle drops. It's odd. Christina Hodson wrote Bumblebee, and Bumblebee has like really unique needle drops. Like it chooses a bunch of B-sides or slightly deeper cuts.
And it's with that movie, it's diegetic. It's part of the narrative.
Right. And here I feel like there is a sort of a similar approach where it's like, okay, we're going to do maybe things that you've heard before, but put enough of a twist on them that we're going to give the movie specific flavor. Yeah.
Real quick, but I forgot this before we jump over to spoilers. One last cast thing, because I do want to highlight it because I don't think it's getting talked about enough. Chris Messina as Victor Zsasz is, I think, he is being cast as the Bond sub-boss role.
Yeah, he's the heavy.
He is the odd job. He's the Jaws. And I think he's kind of great.
Yeah, he kind of kills it. I mean, he's really there to be sort of ugly and menacing in greasy and nasty, and he's fucking nailing every second of it. Like, I wouldn't want to be in the room with the guy.
Well, and it's never, because Ewan is allowed to do big acting in this role. That's kind of what it demands. Whereas Messina, he has moments that are just all quiet menace.
Zsasz really likes to get up in people's faces and be quiet, whereas Roman Sionis is this sort of big, performative, very dramatic,
yes,
very flamboyant character.
They play off each other so well.
Mm-hmm. And there are definite moments of sexual chemistry or sexual tension there. They don't ever explicitly explain that these two men are in a sexual relationship, but the movie queer codes both of them without ever fully saying, like, no, they're together. It avoids that. I'm not sure if that was ever explicitly stated in any prior version or prior cut of the film, but
from the things I read, it was much more explicit. I don't know how explicit, but I definitely think that I would love to see a version of the movie that was more explicit. I mean, I think there's going to be some hot takes about Sionis and Zsasz and depiction and stuff like that, but I don't think it's ever mean-spirited because it's not about their sexuality. Our genre vision sister, Danielle Ryan, hi Danny.
Hello, Danny.
Even said that it's really not about that. It is just that this guy is a sadist. He is a sexual sadist. And
he truly wants to make people feel, not only in pain, but humiliated. There is a scene where he finds out some bad news when he's at his club. And then as soon as he hears it, he hears a woman laughing really raucously. So, of course, him being, really messed up, suddenly goes, oh, she was laughing at me. I think Victor Zsasz tells him, yeah, she was laughing at you. And he goes over and makes her strip, which is very uncomfortable, but it does give you such a great idea of what an asshole this guy is, and what a terrible end that he deserves to have.
And again, to compliment the fact that he can be that asshole and be a villain I absolutely loathed. At the same time, he got some of my biggest laughs out of the movie. So kudos. I really think it's a bravura comic book villain performance, because it feels like a comic book villain. It's not like we need to ground this guy and what would Black Mask really be like. It's like, no, we want to use this villain for a very specific thematic reason.
Yes. So I think we've covered most of what we feel about the movie aside from any spoilers. Although, I mean, I'll tell you my take on the film overall before we head on to that. I had a great time with it. I think it's refreshingly unlike pretty much anything that the DC movies have done, and I'm talking about the DC EU films, obviously, but the fact that they were willing to take it this far, and I think willing to take the sort of risks that we see in this film, is remarkably encouraging. But that's really more about the sort of trajectory of this whole DC franchise endeavor. As an individual movie, this is a fucking great time.
Yeah, I echo that, even removed from all the DCEU, whatever talk. I think in the larger spectrum of comic book cinema, the closest that we've gotten to something like this is Deadpool, but I think Birds of Prey has an edge over Deadpool, and its biggest edge is its director.
Kathy Yan has such a tremendous sense of style. She is not at all trying to match anyone else. There's no sense of like trying to maintain a house style. She is doing things that the other films have not, and having what appears to be a really fun time doing it.
I mean, not just other DC films. Again, I say in the current modern landscape of comic book cinema, this is doing things that those movies aren't. And that's exciting. That's what I want from comic book movies, is like, show me something I haven't seen before. And I think Birds of Prey knocks that aspect out of the park. So let's open the spoiler wall and get a little bit more descriptive, where I think we'll get into more plot specifics, because the plot of this movie, as I talked about earlier with the MacGuffin stuff and about this diamond and how it actually, spoiler wall's up, how it ties back to this Bertinelli murder. Well, it turns out that Huntress was the daughter of the Bertinellis, and she was left for dead, but was rescued by a sympathetic goon, and then trained by, I think, nuns to be assassins, to be an assassin, and which is great. That's very delightfully comic booky. And I think Huntress, because her actual story, which is just a revenge plot, gets to a point where she's like, well, I already killed all the people I wanted to kill, so I'm out of here. I think the movie actually does a good job, because the big moment when you finally get all of the birds of prey together and they're at this fun house, and Sionis and all of his goons are coming to kill Harley Quinn and kill Cassandra, who has swallowed the diamond. This moment is where I was like, I've been having fun with the movie, but this is your make or break moment. Is this going to put me on board with these people as a team? And God damn it, did it ever.
One of the things that this movie is doing, in addition to sort of earning its moments writing wise, I love the way it stages pretty much any hero shot, whether it be, really making sure that when characters are introduced that they get this amazing close-up. Like we saw, I think, an equally good job in Aquaman of like introducing cool things and making sure that they get an awesome close-up. Mm-hmm. Here, this movie is, again, that vibrancy, that sense of attitude comes forth when it's like, when we want to see these people as a team, like it gives us this fucking great shot of them. It's like, thank you for giving me images that I can, hang on to and take home. And
well, you know what else is important to that? Sets.
Yeah, man. The funhouse exterior, with this sort of big woman's face and hands and this sort of cartoon aesthetic to it is, I feel like there's a definite Burton Batman influence to that. Particularly with like the zoo stuff in Batman Returns. And there's definitely an influence of like the big statues that we might have seen in, the Schumacher Batman films. Like this definitely feels like that elevated comic booky, cartoony Gotham that the Chris Nolan movies avoided so heavily and that the Zack Snyder stuff avoided.
This is one of the reasons I love the potential of these DC movies is that, opposed to Marvel, even from its inception, the gimmick was these are superheroes that take place in our world. They're mostly headquartered in New York.
Right. Recognizable places.
Right. Whereas in the DC universe, most of the cities are made up, and therefore there isn't a standard law that you have to abide by when it comes to architectural design or historical influence in a city. So it doesn't feel bizarre to me to have this absolutely has never existed ever funhouse, because it's like, yeah, that's what a funhouse would be like in a made up Gotham City. So why not go crazy with it? And that set goes absolutely nuts. And just talking about it now, I can remember pretty much every big central set piece in that funhouse, whether it's this spinning carousel bit with a bunch of giant rubber hands or a bunch of faces with tongues that are shooting out that are these padded kind of platforms that Huntress runs across, or an actual physical slide like that. My favorite shot in the movie, by the way, maybe, is in that slide sequence in which all the birds are sliding down and then a goon slides down after them, and Huntress stops herself in the slide, jumps up, the goon slides under her, and then she lands on top of him and starts stabbing him. And the camera pretty much kind of takes the perspective of the goon and follows underneath her and then turns around when she jumps on top of him. And you made a really good observation in that, and we mentioned this before, where there were reshoots done for some of the action fight scenes by Chad Stahelski, and I can't remember I think it's 87 Refinery.
Yeah, it's his particular crew of, technicians and stunt persons that will design scenes, like this. And this is one of the big successes of the John Wick films. Like John Wick 3's action scenes were all designed by this crew. And like these people have reached the point of in their careers where there's some of the best people in the business, if not the very best people in the business doing this. Like if you've seen any fight scene from John Wick 3, you know what we're talking about. And there is one fight scene in this film that I believe was directed, and choreographed by this crew. And that's the evidence room fight. Holy shit, is this good. I mean, really fucking good.
It's funny. It's got, I mean, you've seen it in the trailers in which Harley has to hide behind a giant pallet of cocaine, which she then snorts and then knocks one of the bags at one of them, and she's flipping around, and the bat that she's using, she'll drop it, then catch it and pick it back up. All of this stuff is great.
The shot where she bounces the bat off of the floor and up into the guy's face, and then the bat, flies back at her and she catches it. I wanted to applaud.
So you have wonderful kind of choreographed stylistic action like that, but in the same sequence, you get what feels like an appropriate Harley Quinn fight scene gag in which she lights a guy's beard on fire.
Yeah.
And I mean, like you talk about Chuck Jones' Looney Tunes influence, that is a Looney Tunes moment, and I couldn't help but cackle.
Well, Kathy Yan actually spoke about having a lot of Hong Kong influence in the action. In the fight scenes that, don't share that same sort of Chad Stahelski style, like the big fight in the fun house with the rotating platform, the ladies with the tongues, all that sort of stuff. You can tell that is a bit rougher. The geography of that scene is not as immediately apparent. It's not as clean feeling. It's a little bit more confusing. However, when they do stunts and impacts, when somebody hits a goon with a hammer in the nuts, they make sure that they're not cutting and cutting and cutting. It's like you follow the action through to the point of impact. You see the faces to sell the gag. You see the face of the stunt guy that got hit, and then you see Margot Robbie's face. Now, sometimes Margot Robbie's face might be digitally replaced onto a stunt person, but most of the time, I couldn't fucking tell.
No.
For all intents and purposes, it really looks like these characters, these actors are performing these stunts, and while it's not on the level of some kung fu master, it's not Police Story. The fact that we're actually seeing the characters do these things, and instead of cutting around and, enhancing the fakery of it, it feels better.
Well, I know Mary Elizabeth Winstead has talked about in interviews that she did a lot of that actual fight choreography, because she talked about, like, I'm learning moves, not choreography. And she talked about how I wanted to get to doing the choreography, but they were just teaching me these very specific moves, like how to handle the crossbow and how to roll or something. And then when they got to doing the choreography, she found out, like, oh, I was actually learning what was way more important, which was how my movement flowed. And the one scene where it is the big triumphant 360 shot in that carousel where you get to see all the birds in action all at once. Like, that is the big triumphant, like, yes, this is a team. They kick ass, and you're not missing any particular beats. It totally works. And then you get small fun moments like Dinah's hair keeps getting in her way, so Harley Quinn roller skates over to her and gives her a hair tie. Like, these little tiny, intended to be joke interactions, but it helps endear these characters to us as a team.
Yeah, and I like, it's taking a moment to acknowledge something that movies don't frequently acknowledge, and that having a head of hair like Dinah has would definitely not work all that well in a fight. So, yeah, the movie is having a lot of cheeky fun pretty much at all times. But one of the things that I really love about Margot Robbie's performance, and I think the choices from Kathy Yan, is that the movie is allowed to be really, really earnest. And at the core of Harley Quinn's performance, and at the core of her arc in this film, is this sort of brokenness and sadness. And there are moments when she's really letting that show through in a way that's earnest and doesn't at all feel cloying or cheap. There is this close-up on Margot Robbie that is just so awesome after she has to leave her apartment, which was over a Chinese restaurant. It gets bombed and her ceiling caves in and she has to leave. And before she leaves, she gets this awesome close-up, and it lasts longer than I thought it would, where we really let her performance shine through and go, oh, this character's really busted up over this. And
is going through a range of emotions quietly, which is not something we often get to see in superhero action cinema. Things need to keep moving. The movie pauses only a few times, but necessary times.
Right. And she doesn't have to explain how she feels because it's all there in her face. It's a really, really awesome choice to just let characters tell us how they're feeling by focusing on performance and really letting that performance shine through, even when other stylistic decisions are so strong.
Well, and I will cop to saying that the stylistic decisions of on-screen text, which was established in Suicide Squad, and I only think those kind of, roster scenes where it's like, rattling off who these characters are. I think the evolution to it in Birds of Prey is so good. It's pretty much always for a joke, and I think 9 times out of 10 it works. Some of those are some of the best laughs in the movie.
Yeah, there's a scene where Harley Quinn is driving a car and Cassandra Cain is in the passenger seat and she's sleeping or knocked out, I forget. And there's another mercenary who wants this reward that Roman Sionis is giving out, is chasing after them in a car. And we don't really see who it is. And Harley Quinn, while Cassandra Cain is waking up, she lights looks like a quarter stick of dynamite, and she hands it to Cassandra Cain and throws it out the window. We see that the person that is chasing them in this car and firing a gun at them is this woman that has a very pronounced unibrow. And the freeze frame title card that we get for her is some Frida Kahlo looking asshole. It's like, what other, popular comic book, DC movie would have the stones, frankly, to say Frida Kahlo and have anybody expect to get that reference? Like, it's awesome.
Sure. It has a trust in the intelligence of the audience. I think a lot of people will only see the surfaceness of its, profanity is just trying to be juvenile and be
or edgy.
Yeah, edgy. And it's like, this is actually a really smart movie in terms of what it trusts its audience to be able to get, not just in terms of references, but like you're saying, it treats emotional moments with absolute sincerity. It treats every moment with the intended kind of emotion behind it. Like we said with Black Mask, when he has to be scary, that scene where he makes that woman strip, I think it really took my theater by surprise, because when it first started, there were kind of nervous giggles, and by the time he was telling the guy cut her dress off, the theater went dead quiet.
Oh yeah, it's nasty.
Yeah, and I looked over and there was a group of teenage, maybe early 20s looking girls, and they were kind of giggling at first, and that one of them went okay, this is weird. And when that started happening, I looked over and they were just squirming. And it's like, yeah, that the movie is doing so many things. That's what if somebody says, oh, it's just a big joke fest, or it's just being cheeky all the time, I don't think you're seeing what this movie's really excelling at from moment to moment. For
sure. Now, at what point do we talk about the hyena? Because I almost literally could never tell when the hyena was fake or if it was real or if it was ever real. This is one of the most convincing CGI animals I've seen ever. Even if it was CGI, I definitely know it wasn't an animatronic because it was way more animated than that. But how did they do this?
Well, I will say this, compared to the CG hyenas in The Lion King. I mean, obviously this one doesn't have to sing songs and try and emote.
Sure.
As far as like an actual person, an anthropomorphized character. But this hyena looks phenomenal. And I love Bruce. I love him so much. I was genuinely worried when Harley Quinn's apartment blows up and she can't find him. I was like, oh, he's got to be okay, right?
No, for a moment, if they were going to kill the dog, I was going to be legit pissed.
The opening where she goes to some shady pet dealer and falls in love with him, and he leers over and is like, I take payment in kind. Cut to the hyena licking on his dismembered leg. I was like, all right, we're off to a great start, movie.
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear that you and I have had a really good time with Birds of Prey. This is pretty much the movie I expected it to be, but it also is the movie I wanted it to be. I think there are a couple things that they could have done, I don't know, to put put it a little more out there. I think queer coding Ewan McGregor's character and Victor Zsasz was, I don't know, considering how much further they took everything else, it's like, why wouldn't you just take that one little step over and actually having the character say that he's
China? Yeah,
well, that's one aspect of it. I do think that they were planning on this making money in China. You've got an Asian director. You have quite a few Asian cast members, and then, you know, this mostly takes place in the Chinatown section of Gotham.
Well, and Suicide Squad was a big global hit, and that a lot of that has to do with Harley Quinn as a character and as a visual.
Yep.
And so I definitely think there were aspects of the movie that probably got cut away to appease those. And that bums me out, because I agree. I wanted Sionis and Zsasz to be because, I mean, that's going to be trope. Like, I can't believe you would make a gay or queer character this sadistic and evil. What are you trying to say? I don't have a problem with that. I understand if certain people do, but I actually have more of a problem with them not committing 100%.
Well, I mean, is the like, if we're trying to say, like, oh, you know, this person is gay, you know, this person isn't bad because he's gay. You know, I get that, and I think that's relatively easy to avoid. However, there is such a long history of queer-coded villains in cinema, and I feel like they've stepped into that a little bit, and I think that's a misstep.
I mean, this is pretty much like Jafar and Iago in Aladdin queer coding. I mean, obviously taken to R-rated extremes, but it's that level of who buddy.
Give me that lamp, you silly savage, or I'll have you whipped and stripped.
Yes, but he fucking kills it, man. I can't be mad when he's doing such a good job at this thing. And it's something that honestly we don't see in comic book cinema bad guys. Like, there's no attempt, I think, ever to make him sympathetic.
No, he's entirely unsympathetic. However, they do actually make him fairly enjoyable to watch because he's silly. Like, we're allowed to recognize the silliness of him. Mm-hmm. He kind of reminded me a little bit of Michael C. Hall in Gamer.
Yeah, I can pick up what you're putting down. Except
they actually do way better here than with Michael C. Hall in Gamer, who did not get nearly enough screen time.
No, I agree. Yeah, I'm excited and to see him again. And I mean, we got to talk about his dispatching by grenade elicited huge applause and laughing from my audience, and it is staged so beautifully in a moment of absolutely, literally explosive gore.
It reminded me of that moment from Grand Budapest Hotel where Zero shoves Willem Dafoe's character over the over the side of the cliff, where it's almost over with so quickly that you're like, oh, what happened? Well, holy shit!
No, it's a punchline. It's a really quick, you didn't see it coming punchline to a joke.
Yeah, holy shit, does that guy explode?
It's wonderful. Yeah, I had a blast with this movie, man. We both did. It's really, really fun. It's going to take me a while to sit with it to see if I like it more than some of the other current DC stuff that's been good, like Wonder Woman and Aquaman. But man, this is just such a great time at the movies, and it feels again like a filmmaker's happened to make a comic book movie, not a comic book movie that they factory produced a filmmaker to make. It has nothing but personality bursting in every scene. I think that's so valuable. And it's a movie that as soon as it was over, I was like, I want to see that again. And I want another movie with these characters. Now that we've established them all, I just want to hang out with them for another, 2 hours.
Yeah, the movie is clearly a success. And I'm eager to see how other people feel about it. It's critically doing very, very well. But I love the fact that it's restrained in ways that actually make it not beholden to the contemporary template for comic book blockbuster cinema. Like the estimated production budget, I think, was in the mid 80 million, which sounds, of course, incredibly high, but due to inflation and just the, general cost of movie making today, that this would be considered a mid-budget comic book blockbuster.
Well, especially if we're going to take it across to the other kid in the playground, I don't think there's been an MCU movie that's been made for less than 120 million.
Sure.
And those are like the Ant-Man movies.
And yet this manages to pack in, I think, way more personality and still focus, I think, not on the bigness of the action, but rather the impact of the action, it feels like just as big, if not a bigger production, because I feel like there's a lot more impact crammed into this one short little movie. It's less than an hour and 50 minutes.
Thank God. It's beautiful. Isn't that beautiful? You can do these movies and they don't have to be 2.5 hour long epics all the time.
Right. And there's personal stakes. Nobody's trying to end the world. It's wonderful. There's no big beam up into the sky.
No,
looking at you, Suicide Squad.
And to circle back around to Harley Quinn, I like that her arc comes around to being that she recognizes I've been shitty, but I want to try to be at least a little better.
Right.
By the end of the movie, Harley hasn't gone full on hero. She is still a criminal. She's still an anti-hero at best, because the sequel setup is like, oh, Montoya and Dinah and Helena Huntress have gone off and formed a little do-gooder group called the Birds of Prey.
Right.
Whereas me and Cassandra, we're still thieving and being ridiculous, but we're all cool. Like, I like that.
I like that this isn't sort of the traditional team-up movie format where it's like, oh, she has to learn to play nice with others.
Right.
I mean, that kind of happens organically, but it's not like she's trying to find her place among an acquired family like we see in so many, contemporary blockbusters. It's that found family thing. Here, it's not so much about that, because while she does work with the Birds of Prey for this movie, by the end of the film, they're kind of both doing their own thing. The Birds of Prey are off being, depicted as like geeky do-gooders, like with goofy glasses and stuff.
Yeah, with their silly costumes. I love that they made a point of that. Like, yeah, they're doofs. Like, I'm like, that's great.
They're a little dweeby, and that's awesome. I like that they're allowing these characters to be what female characters often aren't allowed to be. They can be sexy, but it doesn't have to be depicted in a way that will pander to the male gaze.
Right. It doesn't have to be an ogle fest.
Yeah. They can be like genuinely awkward or nerdy, which, when that's given to female characters, it's often not depicted in the way that we see here. Women call each other asshole in this movie, which is not something you hear commonly. Women do. Like, asshole usually refers to a man.
Well, I coming again back to Harley and her arc. Like you said, the arc isn't about her having a found family. From the very get-go, it is that she is trying to become her own woman. She's trying to establish her own identity separate from the Joker.
Right.
And I mean, when she blows up Ace Chemicals plant and that song, and I can't remember who's, the Joke's on You plays, I was like, wow, already this is great. And this is like the end of the first act. Where's this going to go? And when her final confrontation with Black Mask happens, and she says right out that I'm the one people should be afraid of. Like, not Mr. J, not you, me, because I'm Harley fucking Quinn. I'm like, yeah, like, fuck yeah. It's wonderful. And that's why by the end, it's like, yeah, she's got her friends. They're not her family. They're her friends, and they're good friends. I like that the reactions between the birds, I don't think ever tips over into saccharine.
No, never. They're supportive of one another without, it at actually grabbing the audience by the collar and saying, look at this.
Right. Love them.
Right. It's not cloying ever in that sort of way, because it's allowed to have rough edges still, which is wonderful. That rough edge provides nuance. I'm not trying to say that the movie is overly edgy, but it balances those things. Again, we're talking about that act of balance. It's an incredibly well balanced movie.
Yeah.
Just as a moment of a point of comparison here, you remember in the Black Christmas 2019 scene where the girls all get up on the stage and they sing a special song, and it's a song that's trying to tell the audience what the movie is and what the movie's about. There's a similar scene here where Black Canary gets up on stage and she's singing "It's a Man's World," but the movie isn't in that moment trying to grab you and be nearly as didactic as that Black Christmas was.
No, there's no hitting you over the head with a 2x4 about the messaging here, because it's not a message movie, it's a character movie. And within that, there are messages to be taken, but the movie is not a screed of sorts.
Right. Again, character first. And that is Birds of Prey's greatest success.
So yeah, we loved Birds of Prey. We had an absolute blast with it. I will hope to see it again before the year is out. But I think it's time to jump over to the shelf where we pick a movie that might act as a good pairing or substitute to our featured film. And we always want to encourage you, loyal listener, to go to genrevision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf picks, and we will feature them on the following week's episode. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Birds of Prey?
Well, we talked about how writer Christina Hodson wrote Bumblebee. Well, Bumblebee stars Haley Steinfeld, but Haley Steinfeld was in a movie a couple years ago that I thought was really, really well written and well directed. And by the same person, actually. Kelly Fremon Craig wrote and directed this sort of teen high school dramedy that, again, displays a really keen sense of attitude and perspective. It's about a girl in her last few years of high school. And the fact that it has such a specific attitude about it and handles itself so well is just constantly rewarding to see. I mean, each scene is so well written and adheres closely enough to what we know about high school cinema to be familiar, but adds enough of its own flavor to be really memorable. It's quite a good film. Edge of 17. It's got Haley Lou Richardson in it, who you might recognize from Split or Columbus. Yeah, highly recommended. Kelly Fremon Craig's The Edge of 17.
Well, for my pick, I don't do this often, but sometimes I think it's important to do a shelf pick for comparison, maybe more so than for recommendation. And the movie I want to pull for Birds of Prey is Atomic Blonde. This is directed by David Leitch, or Leitch, I don't know.
I believe it's Leitch.
Okay, David Leitch. That's, it's pronounced like my last name. David Leitch, who was the other co-director of the first John Wick, starring Charlize Theron. It's an adaptation of, I believe, a graphic novel. And Atomic Blonde is not a bad movie, but I think it's a really good movie to compare to Birds of Prey, because Atomic Blonde has the same kind of commitment to a certain style. It has a female action hero. It's R-rated. It's deliberately violent. But there is a sincere lack of personality and perspective in the movie that I think ultimately kills it. Now, I'm not going to say that that's because the main creative voices behind the movie, as far as writing and directed, were all men. But I think Birds of Prey showcases that if you want to tell those kind of stories, it can really make a big difference to have the perspective of the characters you're trying to tell the story with, to have that in the creative process in a significant way. Because Atomic Blonde never gets there. It never feels like a movie that's truly representative of a certain female perspective. It doesn't really click in that way. And it also just lacks the personality of the characters that it's trying to showcase. Whereas in Birds of Prey, I think having women at the helm creatively in writing, producing, and directing capacities is a reason why Birds of Prey has authenticity behind that attitude.
Yeah, Atomic Blonde is impressive in many aspects. Like, what strikes me the most about it is that it doesn't ever feel like a whole thing. It feels like an exercise in choreography and lighting. And of course, Charlize Theron is awesome in it, but it almost feels like a short film stretched out to feature length, where it's like, it's just never quite enough. I think the story is less than memorable. Like,
I had to professionally review that movie, and I can't tell you one thing about the story.
There is all I remember about it is there is a list of names of spies that is going to be revealed.
That's
and
the
then
MacGuffin.
They try to intercut that with the looming unification of Germany, I believe, like the Berlin Wall coming down, but I can't tell you what the two of them have to do with one another. It was like a Super 8 situation. It's like, yeah, the kid's mom died, and then there's an alien, and then Super 8 tries to tell us that the two of them have something to do with one another when they don't.
So yeah, I think Atomic Blonde, again, I don't think it's an outright bad movie. Like you said, there's things it does very impressively, but I think Birds of Prey is kind of showcasing that perspective behind the camera matters. and it can really infuse a movie with a level of authenticity that you might not get from another production that doesn't have that. So, but let's move on. We're going to go to the listener shelf picks for actually our Jackass episode, since our Ask Us Anything episode was last week. And I love that we got as many comments on the Jackass episode as we did. We were kind of worried that it might have been just in our target demographic, but we got a lot of shelf picks. Eric Fuchs recommended Freddy Got Fingered, and Mr. Milksteak recommended The Tom Green Show, and we're going to circle back around to that in a little bit. Conanzilla, the lovely Conanzilla, who submitted a bunch of questions for our Q&A episode, also had 3 shelf picks for the Jackass episodes. He had 3 transpositions from other mediums. Prairie Home Companion. I think that was because I mentioned watching Popeye. Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, and Adaptation. They all take a property and transform it, simultaneously expanding and honoring the source material. And loyal listener JT recommended Wonder Chosen, which was an MTV2 show. I think it ran for about 2 seasons. Very kind of twisted, dark, bizarre riff on like a Sesame Street parody.
Mm-hmm.
DT Grizzler's recommendation was Crank, which, great. I love the Crank movies. And they're definitely as out there as the Jackass guys are.
Sure. And there's a little bit of Crank influence in Birds of Prey as well. That's
true. Fergal Colreevy, their shelf pick was Home Alone, which, yeah, that's pretty on point, man. Like, that first Home Alone is actually way more violent than you might remember.
Mm-hmm.
The gag that I always remember is Daniel Stern stepping on the big nail.
It's like a Quiet Place sized nail. It's a real big fucking nail. But Home Alone 2 is less Jackass because the effects are like bigger and cartoonier. Like,
yes, they're more Looney Tunes.
Those guys should have been disintegrated by the time they were done with Home Alone 2.
Well, I mean, Daniel Stern he's turned into a skeleton at one point.
That's right. Yeah, he does get fried cartoon style. But yeah, Jackass and Home Alone, the first one, share that sort of like really personal bodily harm. Like when Joe Pesci burns his fucking, or is it Pesci or Stern that burns his hand on the doorknob?
Oh, I think it's Pesci, because then he also gets his head burned by the little torch.
Oh, right. Ow.
It's so good. So fantastic pick. Thank you very much, Fergal. And last one is from Richard Eady, and his recommendation, which this makes literally all the sense in the world, is the Eric Andre Show, which is, he says, has taken a much more absurdist approach to the idea, but is probably the closest thing to Jackass on TV these days. And I think he might be right.
Yeah, he's probably correct. I mean, the sort of man on the street stuff that Eric Andre does is harder to explain than the stuff in Jackass. I mean, Jackass's concepts were so easily explainable with a title and one central image, whereas Eric Andre's bits are way stranger. Like, he'll dress up like a crummy jester and go out and be like an evangelist for ranch dressing. It's like, what the fuck is going on here? Or he'll run into a bakery and be arrested by a fake cop played by James Adomian, and then they start making out in front of all these people. It's like, that's really, really close to like the little person bar fight in Jackass 3.
Yes, very much so. So thank you all. We love getting these listener shelf picks. I'm so glad this experiment has borne such wonderful fruit. Let's do some currently consuming.
Nom, 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 nom.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
And all the well-earned hullabaloo around Parasite, I decided to go back and watch Bong Joon-ho's The Host. Also because we were getting back into production for Finflix, so I wanted to see an aquatic monster movie. I liked The Host when it first came out. I actually bought it on DVD sight unseen back in the day because the buzz was so strong about it.
Same here.
And I liked it, but I wasn't crazy about it over the moon. I'm still really not crazy about it. I think it's a good movie, a really good movie. But it has it's such a unique style, and it doesn't really pay attention to what the format for a giant monster movie should be. Monster is really not so big, but it's still an impressive effect to this day. This is a movie, I think, from 2006.
Mm-hmm.
The monster still looks really good. I mean, you can definitely tell it's not using today's standard of CG creature, but it's still pretty fucking good.
Well, and it's also about the way they decide to show that, the monster. That I mean, I haven't revisited it in quite a while.
Hey, the first scene with the thing is in broad fucking daylight.
Sure,
And
but it's always
wide shots. You see the whole thing.
Yeah, it's in big wide shots. Sometimes it's just in the background, sometimes out of focus, which I think is a really good technique to sell this as a real thing.
Yeah.
Because it's utilizing cinematic language that we don't often associate with effects work.
And the monster is clumsy. When it's running around, it's kind of slipping and sliding and tripping and, causing, big gouges in the dirt and the mud and stuff like that. It's like,
I love that thing.
This really works well as a creature that interacts with its environment.
Right. And that adds character to it. Like, it's a pathetic monster.
Yeah. Well, you can definitely tell that it almost looks like it's in existence basically entirely in pain. Like it's mutated. It almost looks like it shouldn't work anatomically. Like it has these sort of split jawbones coming out of its face at odd angles. And yeah, it doesn't look like a thing that should live. There's later a close-up of a practical creature head in the film. It's not articulated, but you can see it's sort of deformed and like blistered around its eye and stuff like that. And you just think, this thing is awful. This should not live. It doesn't come off as evil. It does come off as pitiful.
Yeah, it's great. And I mean, when you say it's not like a typical monster movie, it's like, no, it's more of a family drama that a monster movie busts into.
Right. And because it's a Korean film, it has a really different approach to its tone than, a similar film made in America might. Even though it has this sort of big family melodrama, it always laces it and sometimes like bashes its head in with absurdism. There's a scene where they think one of their family members has died and the central family is falling all over themselves, wailing with grief in a way that is clearly meant to be comedic and absurdist. And no American film would try to pull that off.
No, it's definitely one I hope gets either rediscovered or revisited thanks to Parasite's success, because that guy ain't made a bad movie that I've seen yet.
Nope.
So, well, on my end, I decided to check off a pretty big cult 80s horror blind spot, courtesy of Shudder, thanks to it being on their platform. I watched Night of the Comet. This is always a movie that I was aware of. Maybe I caught like 5 or 10 seconds of it on TV as a kid. And it was always a movie that when it got brought up, pretty much anybody who knew about it loved it, which was always a pretty good sign that any knowledge of it elicited positive responses. So I was like, yeah, this is on Shudder and I've never seen it. I really have very little idea of what to expect. And man, that's a really, really fun movie and very unique. I mean, I found out later that the lead character was actually what inspired Joss Whedon to create Buffy. And so I was like, oh, okay, because this isn't a character who's, boy crazy or anything. And the main characters are two sisters. And this comet passes over Earth and everybody's, oh, this comet's, we got to go out and view it and stuff. And it ends up either wiping people out or causing this infection that eventually turns them into violence-prone zombies, basically. And it's definitely a comedy with it's a horror movie for sure, but it leans much more on kind of the fun, like a poppy apocalypse vibe to in the 80s. There's definitely things that I think would be considered stereotypical or unwoke today. There's one line that absolutely would raise plenty of eyebrows, and appropriately so, but it's got its heart in the right place. It's telling a story that's kind of less focused on the big sci-fi premise than it is the relationship between these two sisters. Like, that's what really surprised me. It's like, oh, this is why I think people have fond memories about this movie, is because while they kind of jump from apocalyptic scenario to apocalyptic scenario, the movie's focused on them and their relationship and their friendship as siblings. The kind of third act climax is maybe my least favorite part of the movie, because I think it kind of drops itself into a mold that's way more familiar in terms of like, oh, there's a secret government program or something in a facility that we got to break somebody out of. That was the least interesting thing to me, but it's a movie that apparently I'd heard they've been, trying to get a remake off the ground. And I know we're always anxious about anybody remaking any movie that has some kind of nostalgia or positive feelings about it, but the premise is a solid one, I think, to take another go at the story. But what's there is a really fun time. I'm glad I finally got around to watching it. I'm sure if I'd seen it when I was younger, it would leave a much more indelible mark on me. But as it stands, I totally get the appeal, and I had a really fun time with it. So if you've never seen Night of the Comet before, check it out. And if you have, you're probably just giddily remembering how much you loved it and excited that I finally watched it. So yay. Let's close things out with our
comment of the week.
We mentioned the shelf picks of Freddy Got Fingered and the Tom Green Show, and I'm not actually going to feature the full comment, but I urge you, loyal listeners, to go to genrevision.com, go to the post for the Jackass episode, and go read Mr. Milksteak's response to, I believe it's Eric Fuchs's comment about Freddy Got Fingered. And it turns out that Mr. Milksteak, who's one of our wonderful loyal listeners, worked on Freddy Got Fingered. And he tells his story about he was on set the day that they were filming the spinning the baby by its umbilical cord scene.
I've never seen Freddy Got Fingered, but what little I've actually seen of it and heard about it seems like, I don't know, this is kind of singular. Whether in it that's good or bad, I don't know if anybody has made anything like that since, at least not in the big popular sphere.
There's so much context that you need for that movie because it's at that peak of kind of the gross out comedy movement of the late 90s and early 2000s where, there's something about Mary and American Pie. They were all making huge bank. So I'm sure all the old white guys at the studio were like, well, I guess this is what the kids like now. So let's just let them make a whole bunch of these movies. Because there were so many of those types of movies that everybody's appropriately forgotten. And I think because of Tom Green's celebrity at the time with originally his Canadian show and then his MTV show, and the rise of Jackass and everything, that somebody was dumb enough to let him make a movie. And Freddy Got Fingered, I have such mixed feelings about that movie because I think it's a prank of a movie, and that Tom Green was like, they're going to let me make a movie. Well, I'm going to kind of just fuck off and do things that nobody should ever do in a movie. And I think it might be that there's a cult following for that movie that are like, oh, this is an absurdist, Dadaist masterpiece. And I'm like, I won't go that far. But I do think it's fascinating. So, Mr. Milksteak, I'm so glad you shared that story. And I urge everybody to go to genrevision.com and read his account of that because, wow. Wow. So thank you so much for that. And as always, thank you everyone for listening. We're going to be back next week.
It's a double feature. We're going to do Single White Female versus Poison Ivy.
Yes, this is it will be Valentine's week. We'll be posting a couple days after Valentine's Day, but we wanted to do sort of I don't know if erotic thriller is the right term for both of these, but definitely kind of female protagonist and antagonist thrillers. And these are both movies Travis and I have never seen before, Single White Female and Poison Ivy. So we're going in blind. We're going to see exactly what we've got in store, but we hope you'll be back next week to check it out with us. So as always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on Genre Vision.